What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, man. I hope you guys are having a great week. It's currently Tuesday at the time you're seeing this, and this is episode 2 of the highs and the lows for each NFL division. This is the AFC East edition, where we're going to be breaking down all 4 teams in the AFC East, telling you their ceiling or their highs and the floors or their lows of what this next season can be. We're taking in all things account from trade acquisitions to acquisitions in the draft to free agent signings and all things like that, and what I think that equals to for the best scenario and the worst scenario for these teams. Like I said, this is the AFC East edition, so we're going to start off strong with the Bills. The Bills have had a pretty big rise from their previous selves, have a very bright future ahead of them, but with the move of Stefon Diggs to the Texans, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered for the future of the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen has proven to be a top-tier quarterback in this league, but he can't do it all. The Bills battled last year with a lot of injuries to the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and a pretty muddied middle of the season where we saw them kind of struggle and go on a pretty decent game losing streak, ultimately to get everything coming back together and go on a run where they ultimately lost to the Chiefs again, although this time it was at their place. We then look at their draft where they drafted someone with high potential like Keon Coleman. Definitely more of a project wide receiver than some of the other ones we saw come out, but definitely has a lot of potential. And a few other key pieces that they drafted, I think they drafted very well, especially when you're losing someone like Jordan Poyer to an in-division rival. You're going to have to draft pretty well to extend and have a good backfield, especially when you lose someone like an all-pro like that, like Jordan Poyer. You have to draft well to be able to replace that. But when you have someone like Josh Allen, you're always in it. So what are the highs for this Buffalo Bills team? I think for this current iteration of the Bills team, the highs are seeing immediate and huge steps of wide receiver Keon Coleman and some of their offseason acquisitions fitting in almost seamlessly and immediately, so that way they know what they're working with and they can decide whether this is a reload team or a rebuild team. Now, like we mentioned, they did lose some key pieces in Jordan Poyer, and so they're going to have their draft acquisitions that they picked this offseason have a really big impact fairly early on. In the past, we have seen some rookie wide receivers make really big leaps as soon as the first game, as soon as the first couple of games at the bare minimum. I'm not sure if Keon Coleman is going to be able to do that there, as he is known as a project wide receiver. He still has some things to work on, but he also could pick it up very easily. He seems to be a very funny, very smart guy and very athletic, and so he seems like he might be able to put it together, and the Bills are going to need that so they know what they need in the future. I think the high ultimately for them is to get into the playoffs and maybe make a second round playoff game. I don't think they're going to go much further than that. I don't think they have as much firepower as some of the other teams in their division, let alone in a stacked AFC. If they couldn't get it done with the last iteration of this Bills team against the Chiefs, I don't think they're going to be able to do that this time. But I think with how good Josh Allen is, I think he's able to make it work and get them back to the second round. I think that's ultimately their peak, though, for this Bills team. Some of the lows, though, could get really ugly. I think if we don't see immediate impact from wide receiver Keon Coleman or different picks that they had or even different acquisitions they had in the offseason not work out as well as we think they could. If we see Josh Allen where he's throwing a lot of interceptions, a lot of bad reads, a lot of bad choices early on in games, costing them games with his arm, I think it could get really ugly. I think the worst this team could do is not make the playoffs. I still think they have a pretty decent record. I still think they are trying at the end of the season to get into the playoffs. But I think the ultimate low for this team is not making the playoffs, and they really have to take a look at this themselves and see what they can do in the future, whether it be a big trade or, having a really good draft or whatever it may be. I think they're going to have to take a hard look at themselves to rebuild. Moving on to the team that I think most of us, especially this season, have as the winners of the AFC East, the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins are one of the more interesting teams in this division. There are questions of extending quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, but they did just extend Jalen Waddle, so I assume this extension for Tua is coming up. They also have Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert, and a bunch of different guys that we all know their names of. They have an explosive offense. They also added someone like Jordan Poyer from the Bills, an interdivision rival, who's definitely going to help them on the defensive side of the ball. The defense for the Bills was decimated last year, especially due to injuries. So getting someone back like Jalen Phillips, who they lost to an ACL tear, having a full healthy season of Jalen Ramsey, adding Jordan Poyer. They are a bit older, those two guys, especially the last two that I mentioned. Jalen Phillips, not so much. He is a lot younger. But those two guys are a lot older, but I still think they have a good amount of ball left, enough to get this team to a Super Bowl. Because that ultimately is the high end for this Miami Dolphins team. They're all in at this point. They have a star-studded wide receiver core. They have a star-studded running back core. Their offensive line is really good. They've made some offensive acquisitions at that spot. They've made some good defensive acquisitions as well. Some of the ones we just talked about. They drafted really well. When you make these kinds of moves, especially like trading for Tyreek, extending Jalen Waddle, having a pretty close to done extension for Tua, at least we think, you are all in. And so the high for this team, I do think, is at least the AFC Championship. I don't think they have enough experience to get to the Super Bowl. I realize I just said that is their, it's not Super Bowl or bust, but you know what I mean. I don't think they have enough to get to the Super Bowl, especially with how stacked this AFC is. I do think they could get lucky and win the AFC Championship by some happenstance, maybe an injury to another team or something like that. I think they're just a few pieces away. Maybe we see Tua kind of take another step and become a top 10 guy. He's obviously a pretty decent quarterback. But we'll have to see how it pans out. But the high for them is at least an AFC Championship to show progress, and what Mike McDaniels is building down in Miami is working. The low end for this Miami team is fairly simple. I think if they go to a first-round exit once again, I think there's going to be a lot of questions surrounding Tua. If he was extended, gets put out the first round, I think there's going to be even more questions. I think there's going to be questions regarding Mike McDaniel and how he's coaching this team. I think there's going to be questions about should they have extended Jalen Waddle. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of questions, and when questions come, rumors come, and it starts to tear down teams, and we've seen it happen time in and time out. So I would say winning at least a playoff game would be okay for the fans. I don't think that's the highest they can be. I think the best case scenario, like we said, AFC Championship. It's going to be hard though. The AFC is very tough, very stacked from top to bottom. We'll have to see, but I think they can at least get there. I think that would be the best situation. I think the worst case scenario would be first round exit. Now let's talk about the Jets. The New York Jets are about as head-scratching of a team that you can think of. They're relying on an older quarterback coming off an Achilles injury who could be an elite player. We don't know. They've tried to fix up the offensive line. That was a glaring issue for last season alongside Zach Wilson. They get rid of him. They obviously have all the offensive weapons anyone could ask for. The defense is star-studded. But when you're relying on a trigger man who's someone is a bit older and he has an Achilles injury that he's coming off of, I realize all the time that people say don't doubt certain people, don't doubt this guy, don't doubt this guy, don't doubt A-Rod, don't doubt this. I understand that, but we're going to have to see it before we believe it. We only got 4 plays for the New York Jets last year with Aaron Rodgers under center. And overall, I'm just not sure how well that's going to work out. There are some videos of him already, whether he is or not grabbing at his Achilles in that video where he's sitting down on the lawn. We will never know. They will never tell us. And even if they do tell us what was going on, it's probably not the truth. We'll have to see what happens. But listen, man, I'm truly confused as to what their high and lows can be. The high for me is at least making the playoffs and getting a win. I feel like if they don't do that and get into the dance and at least win a game, I feel like there's going to be a lot of upset Jet fans because there's not a lot of time left for Aaron Rodgers. They're going to be right back in the draft in the next 3 years maximum trying to find their new franchise quarterback. And if recent history or history above all shows us anything, the Jets cannot draft quarterback. They can barely draft any other position. They seem to hit with Garrett Wilson. He's obviously on track to be an all-pro wide receiver, but we never know until we know. So I think the high for them, like I said, is winning a playoff game, getting into the playoffs, being in contention. And the lows for them is not making the playoffs. And if there's another injury to Aaron Rodgers, it's pretty much over. And whatever you want to call this Rodgers era with the Jets, I think you can pretty much sign, seal, and deliver that as well. If he comes away with another injury that could be season-ending or anything like that, I think you can pretty much say it's over, unfortunately. Just him on the Jets, his career in total. Now we'll talk about the team that I know a lot of people probably don't care about anymore, the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots drafted Drake May in the draft this year as a hopeful franchise quarterback in the future. He's obviously not going to be the starter. That pretty much heard Jacoby Brissett will be taking on that role for at least the first half of the season. We might see Drake May later on, maybe even some Joe Milton if things go a little bit wonky. The high end for this team is pretty simple. As long as they win a few games and we see some big strides from Drake May and a couple of the wide receivers that they have, an offense looks a little bit more put together. The defense obviously is amazing. They played really well last year. So as long as the defense stays strong, the offense is at least showing strides, and we see a lot of Drake May in the later half of the season. He's playing really well, not making stupid rookie decisions, like stupid interceptions or different things like that, fumbling the ball. They stay healthy. They win at least 6-7 games. That's obviously a big turnaround from where they were last year. They're obviously not a playoff team. They don't have enough talent to be. I think the low end for them is also fairly simple. If we really don't see much of Drake May, it could either mean one of two things. One, they don't trust him enough and he hasn't made enough strides through OTAs, training camp, preseason, and even into the season. He hasn't made enough strides mentally or physically to become the next starting quarterback, so that's a bad sign for them. And then even if we see him play and he does not play well, I think that's going to kind of throw things into a tailspin there in New England. Obviously, there's a whole new regime going on. There's a whole new front office. There's a whole new coaching staff. So we'll never know until we know. That's going to be a phrase that you hear a lot during this series. I get it. I'm sorry. These are just my best guesses. I think the low end for them is seeing him come out and look really, really rough. It can't get much worse than what we've seen in New England the past 2 years at the very minimum. It has not been good. So overall, I think the low end for them could be pretty bad. Let me know what you guys think, though, where I'm wrong, where I'm right. If you're a fan of one of these teams, I would love to hear your opinions, your thoughts, what you would like to see the team do, where I'm wrong, where I'm right. As always, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Hit up all the links in the description below, and I'll catch you on the next video. Peace out.